Welcome, friends, to today's Light and Darkness reading. Today I am going to be reading the final chapter of Light and Darkness. Chapter 34, A First Time for Everything. Duty at the camp closest to the center pass was by far the most dangerous duty in the army. Things had been quiet since the last battle, but being so close to the Dochmonian forces meant a constant threat of harm. Because of the nerve required for this post, only the hardiest soldiers were chosen for this duty. The guard was changed once a month, and 100 men on duty were always commanded by 2 captains. It was commanded by Tombus and Jagruk 1 month, and by Kiel and Sverian the next. 10 soldiers from Lassa Creston volunteered each month along with the others. While they were not luminaries, their presence still gave the men a measure of comfort under the shadow of Dochmon. Winter came and went with no incidents. In the spring, Al-Salah Dene the 28th was born to Alva and Hope Dene. It was a time of great rejoicing and renewed hope for the kingdom of Lassania. He was a beautiful and strong baby with his head already full of dark brown hair and facial features that resembled his grandfather much more than his father. This delighted Alva far more than if the baby had looked more like him. He seldom cried, but he also did not have the smiles and coos so common to babies. His face always bore a serious expression, as though everything in the new world around him was a problem he was trying to solve, and he was constantly deep in thought. His parents delighted in him. Hope's pregnancy had been smooth, easy, and comfortable. She had hardly gained weight, and the only difference in her figure had been her baby bump. Though she did not say so to anyone but her husband, this greatly annoyed Salia. Hendren said that Salia's pregnancy was healthy, but she gained an immense amount of weight and was often irritable. These things were perfectly normal, as Hendren told her. Bali had these symptoms with all of their children. Salia mentioned that Hope did not seem to deal with any of these issues. Hendren told her that Hope was anything but normal. This failed to make her feel better. It was lucky for Alva that little Al-Salah had been born 2 days after he returned from a journey with Bonson to the front. This meant he had 3 weeks to see his little son every evening before he had to leave again. Hope asked whether someone else could go with Bonson just this once, but Alva said he didn't really want to delegate this duty. "Why do you always have to do everything?" she asked. "I don't do everything," Alva replied. "You know what I mean," Hope said hotly. "Not sure I do," he said. "Yes, you do," she said again. "This is going nowhere fast, darling." "Oh, shut up." "Hope," he said gently, "I love you and our son more than anything in this world. I'm so glad that he's here and he's healthy. But because he is, I see no good reason why I shouldn't keep my routine. Many of the men at the front have wives and sons they would like to be with. It's important for me to see them and encourage them." "Don't give me good reasons," she said, beginning to smile. "It's really annoying." "I love you," he said. "I know. I love you too." Ironically, about the same time, Salia was having a similar discussion with Bonson. "So Alva is going to drag you off and leave his wife and newborn son," she said. "Why can't anyone else ever go?" "Alva has his reasons," Bonson replied. "Does he really? Wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. That puts everything in a different light." "You're really beautiful when you're sarcastic." "Don't try to charm me." "Like I have to try." Just don't ever ask Alva's advice about how to be a good husband. I'm pretty sure he doesn't know anything about it. And Hope is so meek, she probably just sits there glowing no matter what he does. So who should I ask? Bonson asked, laughing. I'd say Hellel, but he's not married. Maybe Pensor. Pensor doesn't like me. Never did. But you guys have so much in common. You both have fat wives. You're not fat. Shut up. In a quick yet gentle motion, Bonson scooped up his wife in a cradle position. He held her out away from his body and shifted his arms up and down effortlessly. Nope, he said. You don't feel any heavier. Thalia loved to be picked up, and even though she believed her husband was the strongest man alive, and would not believe him when he said Pryor was stronger, it still made her feel better the way he could maneuver her so easily. When are you going to stop showing off? She asked. When it stops working. It doesn't work, she said, trying to make a serious face. Then how'd we get the baby? She tried hard to make an angry face, but broke into a smile. I guess it works sometimes, she said. Anyway, what does it matter? She said as he put her down, trying not to let him completely charm out her anger. You all do exactly what Alva tells you anyway. Thalia, Bonson said with a flirtatious smile, did I ever tell you that you're kind of a grump? She picked up an empty cup and threw it at him. He caught it. Seriously, he said, I'll be back before you know it. I know when you'll be back, she said. Nothing's going to make it less than 4 days. Then we'd better make the most of the time before tomorrow morning, he said. Clever. We try. The next morning, Alva and Bonson set off again. The birds had come in regularly, and they had every reason to think everything was going on as usual. Alva had been going over his plans again and again every time they took these journeys. As they rode up the pass, for some reason, Alva was thinking about his ride through almost 2 season changes earlier, before he had met Hope, before he had met Bonson, and before he had met most of the others. As they rode past the short, shaggy cedar trees, Alva said, You see those trees, Bonson? Yes. 2 season changes ago, I rode through here. It was the first time I ever saw one of the Dachmanim. You've told me about that lots of times, Bonson said. What about the trees? It's just funny. I felt so tired then, like I was ready for life to be done. I saw those trees and I felt like one of them. Like your father always said, Bonson replied. Things change. I'm glad you're up on your Al-Salah-Dene quotes. Alva, Bonson said with a humorous smile, I'm going to say this at least once. More than half of the sayings you attribute to your father have been said by all kinds of men for hundreds of season changes. I know, Alva said, smiling, but my father did say them. They both chuckled, and then Alva grew silent and thoughtful. Let me ask you something, brother. Do you know who you are? I think so. Good. Don't ever forget it. Why don't you elaborate so I know I haven't missed something? Bonson, I always believed that my father was the best man who ever lived. Like you said, things change. Now I would say the best men I have ever known are my father, Pensor, Lord Hellel, and yourself. That's a greater honor than anything I can imagine. Far more than I can express. Then don't express it. Just don't forget it. I won't. You know what's funny? What? Before I met you, I thought I was the greatest man alive. The irony of it is, you were, and you just didn't know it. I said I thought I was. I know. You were so convinced of your own greatness, you couldn't see your real greatness. That doesn't make any sense, Alva. The truth doesn't always make sense. Divan said that, not my father. Well, I appreciate what you told me, and I won't forget you said it. But I don't care about greatness anymore. I just want to see us win this war. We will. One more thing, brother. Besides Hope, my father, and Pencil, you are the best friend I've ever had. I just wanted to tell you that now in case I don't get a chance to again. Thank you, Alva. I've never hated or loved any man as much as you. Well, I guess that makes me the best and worst man you know. Only the best. Thanks, Alva said. Too bad we don't have anybody to fight now. They laughed and rode on. As usual, it was late morning as Alva and Bonson rode up to the highest camp, after sleeping at the next one down. All the soldiers at the highest camp were either sleeping in their tents or performing their duties for the day. One of the captains was always there to meet them, and today it was Sverian. He smiled and said, "Good morning, my lords. All is quiet as usual. Same old boring, dangerous job." They dismounted. Bonson walked over to shake hands with Sverian, as Alva looked around at the men standing guard closest to him. They were facing the pass, being the guards closest to the camp itself. Alva knew each man and his position very well. One of the men reached up to scratch his face, and Alva noticed the way he moved was different than usual. He said, "Something's wrong." At that moment, a dart pierced the side of his neck. It was a blow dart that had come from a tiny crack in the command tent of Sverian and Keel, which was about 50 paces away. Bonson looked at Alva the moment he said something's wrong, and in the last instance before Alva lost consciousness, he said, "Bonson, get back to Lassania. Lead them to victory." Not knowing exactly what was going on, Bonson reached for his sword, but Sverian shoved him several yards. He fumbled forward, and suddenly a great net flew through the air and caught him from behind. The net was of Aknanian invention. They were used for catching great wolves. It had metal spikes on 4 sides and was shot from a large crossbow on a stand in such a way as to catch the wolf or man and pin him to the ground. The crossbow was also in the command tent, and the moment Alva was shot, the doors were flung open and the net was shot as Sverian shoved Bonson into place. Bonson was flung to the ground on his face so hard he lost his wind. The net held him pinned firmly down from behind. The metal spikes drove deeply into the earth. Once Alva passed out and Bonson was caught in the net, the guards closest to Sverian turned around. They were not Lassanian guards at all, but Dachmonian soldiers. The one in the center was tall and muscular, the same build as the Lassanian he had impersonated. He laughed loudly and said, "So, Alva Dene is not invincible after all." Then he commanded the man closest to him, "Bring the wagon." Bonson regained his breath, but did not speak. He only listened. Depending on the poison in the dart, Alva might be unconscious, not dead, and he himself had been caught but not killed. Would they be hostages? Now was the time to gather information. The muscular man walked over to Alva's lifeless body. "Prince Matarin will be glad to see him," he said. "So will the Dachmanan," Sverian replied. "Well," the muscular man said, "you wanted this one. Kill him and let's be on our way." "I'm going to take a little time with him," Sverian replied. "We can't wait," the man said. "We have Dene and we need to get him into Huron before they realize he's gone." "I'll catch up when I'm done," Sverian replied. "It won't take me long to overtake the wagon. I want to have a little talk with my master here." As you wish, the man said. See you soon. Just remember, there's no reward if you don't show up to claim it. The Dachmonian soldiers brought a wagon. Bonson could only see the wheels, pinned as he was to the ground. But he could hear the muscular man lift Alva's body and throw it inside. And he could hear the hooves of the horses and the wheels of the wagon as the soldiers departed. Now, my lord, let's have a little chat, Sverian said. It will be several hours before the lower camp misses Alva. When I saw you both coming, I sent the messenger bird to tell them you had both arrived safe and that all was well. Now the thing is, we Aknanians like to have a little fun with our captives. Our Huron masters never allowed it, but we found ways on the sly occasionally. But there are no masters here besides the one I caught like a rat in a trap. Any questions before we get started? Where are your men? Bonson asked. Sverian laughed. Last night was my turn to oversee the night watch while Kiel slept. One by one, in silence, I killed all the night watchmen. I took them from behind as they were watching the pass, and they thought I was just checking on them. That allowed the Dachmonian soldiers in, and we killed the rest of the men as they slept. Kiel sensed something was wrong, I guess. He had come out of the tent as we approached it and killed 4 Dachmonians before they brought him down. Should have slept with his breastplate, but he didn't. We threw him on a pile with the rest of the dead bodies. How long have you been serving them? Bonson asked with anger rising in his voice. I don't serve them. I serve myself. But if you want to know, Dachmonian spies contacted me a few days after the banquet celebrating the last battle. It takes some time to set something like this up. But you swore allegiance to Alva Dene. So? No Aknanian has ever broken his word. What did Dene's father say? Ah, yes. There's a first time for everything. Why? Bonson screamed. Because I won't follow a man who stands by while another man takes his woman and then becomes that man's lackey and marries a fat barmaid. I had an old score to settle with you anyway. Sverian of Aknan never truly loses. You thought you defeated me at the tournament, but in the end, as you see, victory is mine. Sverian! Bonson shouted in fury. His sword and dagger were stuck under his body. He had fallen forward with his elbows so that his arms were trapped against the arm. He began to writhe vigorously, trying to attain freedom. Good, Sverian said as he drew his dagger. This will be more fun if you're angry at the beginning. At that moment, Sverian heard a slight noise behind him. He turned to find Kiel, who immediately ran at him. His side was drenched with blood, but he had another man's shirt wrapped tightly around it. Kiel was badly wounded, but not dead. After they threw him on the pile with the dead and left him, he had tied one of the men's shirt to stop his bleeding. Then he had passed out from the pain. He woke up when he heard Alva's voice in the distance saying, "Something's wrong." Once the Dachmonians had left, he had been silently creeping up behind Sverian to take him from behind. Unfortunately, his wound made complete silence difficult, and Sverian heard him as he drew closer. Kiel had a sword in his right hand and a dagger in his left. As he ran forward toward Sverian, he threw the dagger toward Bonson. It landed just in front of him. Kiel, taking his sword in both hands, knocked Sverian's dagger out of his left hand. But Sverian stepped back rapidly and drew his own sword with his right. There was a thunderous clash of swords as the two men engaged each other. Bonson knew he must act fast. His hands were trapped with his elbows on the ground and his hands in front of him. Though he was held tightly down, he could just get his hands into a push-up position. Bonson usually did 200 push-ups every day. On days he had the time, he would do a few extra sets of 200, see what the maximum amount he could do was. His personal record was 378. He pushed against the net with all his might as he heard the clanging of Kiel and Sverion's swords. Kiel was a great swordsman, but not as good as Sverion. Besides this, he was wounded. However, his element of surprise and the rage with which he fought gave him a fighting chance initially. He had driven Sverion back several steps while the latter gained his foot and adapted to this surprise. But Sverion was so experienced in single combat that his defense was very difficult to penetrate. He soon turned the situation to his advantage and drove Kiel back with his weight and power. Kiel defended himself vigorously, but he was in pain and losing blood. The entire fight lasted less than a minute and ended with Sverion piercing Kiel's torso with a second wound. As his sword plunged into Kiel's flesh, he said, "I always thought you were an idiot, Kiel." At the instant Kiel was stabbed, the metal spikes holding Bonson's net flew out of the ground, and Bonson threw off the net and rushed at Sverion, grabbing the dagger Kiel had thrown him with his left hand and shouting, "Sverion!" Sverion pivoted toward him and swung his sword heavily down on him, but Bonson parried the blow to the left with Kiel's dagger and drove his shoulder into Sverion's solar plexus. The force of this blow caused Sverion to let go of his sword as he fell to the ground with Bonson on top of him. In his rage, Bonson had thoughtlessly dropped Kiel's dagger so that he could better grab Sverion to take him down. Sverion had not yet caught his wind. As Bonson gained a mounted position on top of him, he grabbed his throat with his left hand and began punching him in the face with his right. He punched and punched until Sverion's body went still. Whether he died from the hand on his throat or the powerful blows of the mighty Bonson would have been difficult to say. "Fool!" Bonson shouted. "You would have become a lord and a general in Alva Dene's army. You worthless fool! But not as great a fool as the man who trusted you." As Bonson began to weep, he heard Kiel's voice faintly say his name. He rushed over to where his friend was lying, bleeding to death. He put his hand on his side to stop the bleeding. "I'm dying," Kiel said. "No," Bonson said. "We just need to get you to Hope." "It's too late for that. It would take too long, and I don't think she could bring a man back to life after being dead a whole day. Besides, I'm not Alva Dene." He said this last line with a faint smile, and with what seemed like a last effort, he "Let me go. I wasted most of my life on frivolous concerns. But in the end, it really meant something. It was the greatest honor of my life to serve Alva Dene and to serve Lord Bonson, the pride of the Twin Kingdoms." Kiel seemed to sink into sleep, but Bonson shook him. "Wait, Kiel," he said. "I need your help." Kiel opened his eyes wearily. "They've got Alva, Kiel. I think he's alive, but I'm not sure. What should I do?" "Didn't Alva say something to you at the end?" "Yes, he did." "And why are you asking me what you should do?" Keel said with his last breath. Obey your master's final command. The end. Well, my friends, that is the end of Light and Darkness. Stay tuned for the beginning of the third novel in the series, Love Stories and Wars.